Next, I would like to introduce Perry Sutton, who is going to facilitate the Youth Engagement Panel. Perry is a program officer on the family planning team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Perry's experience ranges from managing clinical training programs and health information systems to supporting bilateral health projects in several low-income countries. In addition, Perry has experience as a Peace Corps volunteer in Mali as well. She will introduce the next youth panelists as well.
Thanks very much. These are youth panelists, 2 of whom are youth and 2 are not, but all of them work on youth issues. Yeah, so I'm here because of a core belief that all women and girls deserve the right to, or deserve the opportunity to determine their own future. I've heard it said in many different ways, but just to hear from the audience, if you agree with that statement, give a round of applause. Thank you. So obviously giving women and girls access to family planning information and contraceptives is key in achieving this. We know that up to a quarter of girls in sub-Saharan Africa drop out of school because of unintended pregnancy. And furthermore, it's a matter of life and death. Maternal causes account for 15% of deaths of adolescent girls around the world, and that proportion is even higher in the poorest countries of the world. So clearly, we need to do much, much more to provide adolescents with family planning information, supplies, and services that they need. So let's talk about this. Specifically, I'd like for the panel to talk about ways that we can innovate and do a better job of using social media and engaging youth to achieve the goals of FP 2020. And so with that, let me introduce you to our 2 youth representatives. We have Makda Mikra, who is the program director for the Young Women's Christian Association of Ethiopia. So it's a great pleasure to have you. You're one of the few people who haven't traveled far and wide to get here. And we're very interested to learn about your experience here in the host country of this conference. Makda graduated from Georgetown University Law School with a master's in legal studies and human rights. And she has a passion for women's rights, girls' education, and women's economic empowerment. Next to her is Yemarai Nyoni, and he is the executive director of an organization he started, Bulawayo Youth Development Organization, and he formed it to harness youth innovation for social transformation in Zimbabwe. He's also the national facilitator of the Zimbabwe Young People's Network on Sexual and Reproductive Health and HIV and AIDS. He's an innovator, an author, an advocate committed to change in the sphere of youth and development. So, and before I introduce the other 2 panelists, I'd just like to get you 2 to open up this conversation. And Makda, maybe first you can speak to your role in reaching youth, adolescents, and some of the important challenges you see, and also solutions that you're applying.
Thank you, Perry, for the kind introduction. I would like to start by talking about the YWCA. The Young Women Christian Association has been around for a very long time. It has been a trailblazer regarding young people by involving young people and young women and also families. I would like to briefly talk about what the YWCA of Ethiopia does here in Ethiopia regarding young people and also sexual and reproductive health. We have one project that we do in Addis Ababa University regarding sexual and reproductive health and young people. That program engages young people in providing sexual and reproductive health trainings and also mentor-mentee programs that would engage young people to provide peer-to-peer education programs and also replication trainings, just so that young people could involve in having a constant conversation about reproductive health, sexual and reproductive health issues. We tried to respond to the problems existing in higher learning institutions in Ethiopia because there was a huge challenge regarding sexual and reproductive health issues. A lot of young people were HIV/AIDS positive. There was a high prevalence in HIV/AIDS. There was a high prevalence in unintended pregnancies. So we tried to respond to that by providing several program activities in relation. So these programs are also implemented by supporting young women in Addis Ababa University, by supporting them, by providing them with bursary supports just so that they could support their own education, because a lot of young women were engaged in intergenerational sex and sex for money because they have economic challenges. So we try to engage young women and also young people by providing sexual and reproductive health trainings, like I said earlier, economic support programs, and a unique program that we have by establishing an all-purpose kiosk within the university, just so that young people would be comfortable enough to buy their gums and condoms all at the same time and place. There's another also important program that I want to talk to you about today. It's about young people living with disabilities. A lot of young people living with disabilities don't have that access to information regarding sexual and reproductive health issues, specifically those young people who have sensory impairment, because there's a huge barrier of communication with young people with sensory impairment. So we try to address that by focusing on disability-sensitive trainings on young people with sensory impairments. We provided brailles and other communicative materials just so that young people with sensory impairments could have that access to information that a lot of other young people don't have, a lot of other young people have. So those IEC materials in braille and also audio tape are also provided for for young people with hearing disabilities. There was also a disability-focused training, and what makes this program special is we provided sign language trainings for sexual and reproductive health providers, just so that they could communicate well with young people living with disabilities, and young people would be comfortable enough to go to a health center and be provided with that service, because they would know that service provider knows their language, speaks their language, they would be comfortable enough to talk to them. So that was one of the special programs that we did regarding young people and sexual reproductive health.
Wow, great. It's a particularly interesting question, how you use social media to reach youth with disabilities and sensory impairment. You're the first person I've heard to speak to that. It's great. And to your right, we have Yemerai Nyoni, and Yemerai, who I've already introduced. We want to hear from you about the power of youth networks. It's a focus of the work that you do. And so tell us what you've seen as possible through working through these networks, and specifically how you use social media as an advocacy tool.
Okay, thank you, Perry, and thank you very much to the organizers for giving me an opportunity to speak on the panel. Well, I'll just outline 3 key networks I've had the privilege of working with. The first one is Women Deliver. There's a Women Deliver 100, which is a team of very strong, passionate young advocates drawn from across the globe. And the idea is to gather these similar thinkers together to understand how we are creating influence in different parts of the world. That initiative has gone ahead for us to have what is called the Sea Exchange initiative, partnership with institutions like Bayer, I believe, and Johnson & Johnson and other organizations. And the idea there was to go beyond just providing a platform for young people to interact, to seeing how to practically empower us as youth to create initiatives on the ground that will create a change for young women and young men also. But in this regard, looking at family planning issues. I've also had an opportunity to work with AFRIAN, that's the African Youth and Adolescents Network on Population and Development. I serve in the executive committee of that network, and it's a coalition of youth country networks from over 32 African countries. And our basic aim is to create a platform where we can organize youth participation in the African continent, looking at youth development issues. One of the initiatives we carried out there was, it's called Y for Karma, which is Youth for Karma. It's a campaign that is created with support from UNFPA, the African Union. And what we're basically doing is taking, Karma, the campaign on accelerated reduction of maternal mortality, is a high-level commitment. But for action to be seen on the ground, for decision makers to be held to account, the critical constituencies that will benefit from implementation of Karma, that's us as young people, that's women also, need to be aware of the commitments that heads of state have made and how we can hold them to account back home. So we've done that in a sense to ensure community mobilization. So what we're doing also in that regard is a lot of work on social media. We managed, for example, during the AU summit in January, we had about 3 young leaders from the team attending a high-level event with heads of state. And what we did was to take pictures of heads of state after they recommitted to Karma, and then we would share that with young people from different countries. For example, the head of state of Nigeria supporting young people's engagement in Karma. And what that does is it shows us as young people back home that indeed there is an opportunity for us to engage with our leaders because they are supporting our partnership. Finally, I've worked back home with our Young People's Network on sexual and reproductive health. So this is a network of over 1,200 organizations drawn from across the country. And our job is to put the youth voice at the center of the decision-making platforms that we have in country. But in terms of the work we've done with social media, we recently launched a campaign. It's called Young People's Network Get Engaged. It's a mixture of both online and offline engagement of young people, where we get to interface with experts, ask very simple questions, but we've also used it as a platform to try and understand the different complexities that we go through as young people in different areas. So what we've done is, because our networks have quarterly meetings where we discuss the issues within our different districts, provinces, and at national level, we use that then to capture the information that comes from those meetings insofar as identifying issues that we can take up for advocacy. And then we use that, like we did with our recently launched education strategy by the Ministry of Education, to scale up the advocacy work that we're doing with different decision-making institutions. So yeah, that's just an overview of the work that we're doing.
Wow, thanks so much. The use of social media for government accountability and the power of youth to engage in that way is so important. You're doing great work there. So now let's pose some questions to our other 2 panelists. To my left, I have Suzanne Petroni. She's the Senior Director of Gender, Population, and Development at the International Center for Research on Women, ICRW. And she leads ICRW's research and programs on reproductive health and rights, as well as gender and population dynamics. It'd be great for you to tell us a little bit more about that work. She's also a Georgetown alum. We have a lot of Hoyas on the stage today, probably more in the audience. And she received her PhD in gender and social policy from the George Washington University. So thanks for joining us. And over on the far side, we have Klaus Brill from Bayer Healthcare. He's the Vice President of Corporate Commercial Relations there. He's a biologist by training, and he's had a long career focused on fertility control, on hormone replacement therapy, gynecological therapy, and prostate cancer. So, Magda, why don't you go ahead and ask the first question of either of our panelists, and ask some tough questions.
I'll try. We have tried to highlight what we do with young people. My colleague here tried to highlight the social media issues. As a YWCA, we engage young people. As Bayer, what do you do with young people, and why are you focused on young people's work? Can you explain that to us?
Yes, sure. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to talk about our engagement in societies and what we as a company can bring to societies as a value. And you know, this goes back to our motto or vision, which is Science for a Better Life. And embedded in that mission statement are a couple of things to make products available to those who can afford and can benefit from the products. On top of that, we want to get innovation done not only by developing new products, but only to open up new ways how we can improve. One of those where we are engaged is education. And why is that? This goes back maybe to the year 2008, early 2009, when I met with the Director General, Renate Beer, from a German foundation called Foundation for World Population. And we talked about how we can build a better, stronger relationship between, and what can we think to do in the future. And I asked Renate, what have you in mind, what we can do different, what have been done in the past? And then she talked about, well, there is always a problem of education in developing countries like Africa, and especially our mission in Uganda had some ideas to bring more education to very young people at primary schools. And I said, well, let it happen. And why is that? Why is it important to bring education about reproductive health to young people? And I think when you look back and you be honest with yourself, we talked about young, more in the age group, maybe 18 and above. We never thought about how important it is to bring knowledge to people or to young boys and girls aged 10 to 14, which are at their entrance of their reproductive life, and to let them know what is happening to their bodies. This is why we decided to enter into a public-private partnership, and I have to say DSW is a great organization to work with, and it's really fun how we really develop that program over time and how engaged DSW are in bringing that project forward. And as a result, we thought it might be good to focus on primary schools in 3 districts in Uganda, and we covered 10 schools. And the interesting part of that is we not only thought about to talk to the boys and girls, of course, and their teachers, but also to bring in the parents. And what is, I think, very important, what we have done right from the beginning, really to engage the district political leaders and the healthcare workers. So we built a broad community on what it does take to make that education happen. What we want to achieve in those days were to increase the sexual and reproductive health knowledge of young adolescents in primary schools, create support among parents, teachers, and community leaders for reproductive and sexual health of young adolescents, to increase access, utilization, and referral of quality youth-friendly, I underline youth-friendly, services for young adolescents, and of course, to publish the project's results and recommendation. This is why I'm here to talk about it. And it's always fun to talk about good things, and we achieved good things, to be honest with you. And I think not only that, we had quite some important and significant outcomes of that, and I would only highlight two. And the one is that the dropout rate of girls at schools significantly decrease. So in 7 out of the 10 schools, more girls finish their primary schools, which is a big achievement. I think equally important is what we have achieved on the political front, I would call it, because in 2 districts, the political leaders decided to take up the program in their school curriculum. So it becomes a little bit of a sustainable element of that educational program. But what is much more, let's say, excited to see, and here I would like to take you on the journey to Uganda, maybe into the rural areas, where you're in the afternoon sitting under a big tree, having all these teachers around you, the parents, and the big crowd of the boys and girls. And when you listen to the boys and girls, and some of them standing up and saying, a young boy said, "I have been empowered." Can you imagine what this does mean? That he really stands up and say, "I have been empowered." Or another girl stands up and say, "I learned skills how to say no." Please imagine what this does mean for girls and boys being at that age group. And I think beside all these facts you can communicate about in terms of outcome, please imagine what the impact for that young girls and boys is to have that educational efforts being perceived.
Yeah, great, thank you. I hope the breadth of that work and those innovations are disseminated and spread to reach more young people. Yamarai, what question would you like to pose? I see you on your tablet over here, so I'm sure you've got a number to choose from.
I had a number of daggers, so I'm just trying to pick which one is sharpest. Well, to be honest, I'm a young person, a youth leader. I work in a youth serving organization. And the sentiment amongst us as young leaders has been, we are not doing enough work. We are not seeing sufficient results so far as the status of adolescent sexual and reproductive health is concerned. So my question to you, Suzanne, is given the existing work you've done and the engagements with different kinds of leaders, how do you see the status, for example, or the way that we are investing in adolescent sexual and reproductive health changing in the next 5 to 10 years? And how can we make sure that we begin to see the results that we really want to see?
That's a great question, and thank you for not throwing a dagger at me. I've been doing this almost 20 years now, and it's been remarkable to see the growing attention to adolescents, particularly sexual and reproductive health over that time. But the field is changing, and it's moving in the right direction. So 20 years ago, adolescent health really wasn't anything on the global health scene. It just started to come onto the agenda that adolescents were a distinct cohort, a population that needed specific attention. And the bulk of that attention was around sexual and reproductive health, and rightly so, because we have these high rates of HIV infection, STI infections, early pregnancies, and we still have a ton of work to go. You heard Dr. Babatunde talk about the UNFPA State of the World Population Report. If you haven't seen it yet, the pictures are stunning and saddening. It's called Motherhood and Childhood, and it is very powerful. When you read that 7.3 million girls under the age of 18 are giving birth each year, 2 million of those births take place to girls under 15 years old. 90% of births to adolescent mothers take place to married adolescents. So people are starting to pay attention to the sexual and reproductive health issues, to child marriage, the fact that there are 14 million girls who are forced into marriage before the age of 18 every year. And this is contributing to them coming out of school, coming away from their peer networks, in many cases living a life that's akin to indentured servitude, where they really have no one but their husband and in-laws to pay attention to. So the good news is people are starting to pay attention. Donors are starting to pay attention. The UN Commission on Population and Development last year held its first ever session focused on adolescents and youth. The Lancet, the medical journal, last year had a groundbreaking series on adolescent health. And this year, in fact, this week, they have an editorial, which hopefully someone can tweet around so you can all read it, a really good editorial on the importance of adolescence, the second decade of life as being absolutely critical, both to meet the needs of adolescents now and to help societies in the future, because the behaviors and the health that adolescents have now really influence them for many years to come. In that editorial, The Lancet announced that they're creating a commission on adolescent health and well-being. I'm very honored to say that I'm on that commission, and I'm actually leading the youth participation outreach. We have an open call right now and for the next 2 weeks for young leaders. We want 2 young members of the commission to participate actively on that. And not only will they be in person participating on the commission, but look in about a year from now to online participation where many more young people from around the world can engage.
Thank you. Do you have another question, Magda?
I have a question for you, Perry.
Oh, all right.
I mean, you're here and you're a representative of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, so I might as well ask a question. I'm here representing young people, young women, and also women. And I was just wondering, what kind of message do you have for young people and young women and adolescent girls? If you'd like to talk about that while talking about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and also your work, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll say that the message to young women and girls is that you absolutely deserve to be at the center of this agenda. And that you're the future. It's pretty straightforward, and you have such power to create change as part of this movement. The Gates Foundation, our historical focus has been on the development of new contraceptive technologies and the introduction of those technologies, and at the country level on reaching urban poor. And in both of those initiatives, young women and adolescents are taken into account with the specific activities. But I will say that the Gates Foundation also recognizes that we're not doing enough in this space. I think just as the global community is realizing this, we are too. And so it's so exciting that this is the focus of the week. And I look forward to hearing more from individuals like you on what more can be done and where the real gaps are.
If I may, I have 4 more comments to make. One is, 30 seconds. One is make men part of the solution. Don't forget about men. Number 2 is, DSW together with us have developed a toolkit how you make such a program happen. Please visit the website of DSW. Number 3 is the champion of Uganda of that program is at the conference and give a presentation. So David Kafembe will present the results and all the stuff. And the good news is we agreed with DSW to open up another educational program in Kenya, which recently starts.
Thank you. I think the next panel will continue on this conversation. So I want to thank you so much for Perry for facilitating this, and thanks for the questions. I'm really happy to see this kind of panel where we actually can question leaders in global organizations and private sector companies as well. Thank you so much.